When black surgeon Marianne became head of surgery at a prestigious hospital, she thought it was the achievement of a lifetime. But soon, she faced resentment from colleagues and doubts about her skills. Who will stand by her when everything is on the line? Don't go anywhere, the best is yet to come. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and tell us if this story of courage and honesty resonates with you. And be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring story. Chapter 1: A Dream Fulfilled. Marianne Evans had worked for years to reach this point. From her earliest days in medical school, she had dreamed of becoming a surgeon. While her classmates chose fields with more predictable hours and less pressure, Marianne was drawn to the operating room. She loved the precision and intensity, the exacting demands that surgery required. She poured her energy into every exam, every clinical rotation, and every residency placement, rising through the ranks with sheer dedication and skill. Now, after more than a decade of relentless hard work, she had earned a prestigious position as the new head of surgery at St. Matthew's Medical Center, one of the most respected hospitals in the country. On her first day as head of surgery, Marianne arrived early, walking through the bustling halls of the hospital with a sense of pride. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the polished floors and modern facilities. St. Matthew's Medical Center was a place she had dreamed of working at, a place where breakthroughs in medical science and pioneering surgeries were almost routine. Now, she was part of that world, and not just as a member of the team but as its leader. When she reached her office, she took a moment to take it all in. The office was large, with tall windows that overlooked the cityscape and shelves lined with surgical texts. A polished nameplate sat on her desk, Dr. Marianne Evans, Chief of Surgery. Seeing her name on that plate filled her with pride. She had earned this through years of perseverance and sacrifice, and she was ready to make her mark. As the first few hours of her new role unfolded, she met with hospital administrators, department heads, and some of the doctors on her team. Most were polite, congratulating her on her new position, though she could sense an underlying reservation in a few of them. Some greeted her warmly, while others offered handshakes that felt slightly strained, their smiles a touch too forced. She dismissed these subtle gestures, attributing them to the natural awkwardness that came with a change in leadership. She believed that, in time, her work would speak for itself and that her team would come to respect her skills. But as she moved from one introduction to another, Marianne couldn't shake a nagging feeling that she was being judged on something other than her professional achievements. She caught occasional glances exchanged between colleagues, looks that she couldn't quite interpret but felt like doubt. Was it because she was young for the position? Because she was a woman? Or, perhaps, because she was one of the few black surgeons in a leadership role at the hospital? She pushed these thoughts aside, determined to focus on what mattered most, her work and her patients. In the afternoon, she was scheduled to observe her first surgery as head of surgery, a complex liver resection that was being performed by Dr. Eric Bishop, one of the senior surgeons. As she scrubbed in, she noticed a slight tension in the room. Dr. Bishop, who had applied for the position she now held, greeted her politely but coolly. He was courteous, but Marianne could feel the stiffness in his voice, the carefully concealed disappointment. She decided to address it directly. "Dr. Bishop, know you were also a candidate for this position," she began, meeting his gaze with a steady, respectful look. "I want you to know that I value your expertise and experience. I hope we can work together to make this department stronger." Dr. Bishop's face softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness in his expression. "Of course, Dr. Evans. I look forward to collaborating." Throughout the surgery, Marianne observed his technique, noting his precision and efficiency. He was clearly a skilled surgeon, and she respected his work. But she could tell that he felt undermined, that her position represented an unspoken rivalry. She silently promised herself that she would earn his respect and that of every surgeon on her team, not through titles, but through her skill and dedication. Later that day, Marianne met with the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Linda Barnes, a respected figure known for her direct and no-nonsense approach. Dr. Barnes had been one of Marianne's advocates for the position, and Marianne was eager to discuss her goals and vision for the department with someone she trusted. Dr. Barnes welcomed her into her office, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Marianne, I'm thrilled to have you here. You have a remarkable track record, and I know you're exactly what this department needs." "Thank you, Dr. Barnes. I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity," Marianne replied, her voice warm but purposeful. "I want to bring in some new protocols, perhaps increase training on minimally invasive procedures. I've also been researching new technologies that could improve patient outcomes." Dr. Barnes nodded approvingly. "I think that's a fantastic direction. But, Marianne, I want you to be prepared. Not everyone is going to welcome these changes with open arms. Some of our senior staff can be set in their ways." Marianne felt a wave of gratitude for Dr. Barnes' candor. "I understand, Dr. Barnes. I've noticed a bit of resistance, but I'm confident that, with time, they'll come around. I'm here to work with everyone, not against them." Dr. Barnes smiled, her gaze filled with respect. "That's the attitude you need. Just know that you have my support, and if you ever need anything, my door is open." As Marianne left Dr. Barnes' office, she felt a renewed sense of determination. She knew that winning over her colleagues would take time and that she might face challenges she couldn't yet foresee. But she was ready. She had worked too hard and come too far to let doubt or resistance stand in her way. That evening, as she prepared to leave the hospital, she took one last look around. The hospital lights flickered softly, the halls quiet now that the day's rush was over. She could feel the weight of her new role settling on her shoulders, but it was a weight she welcomed. This was her dream, to make a difference, to save lives, and to prove that she belonged here, not just as a surgeon but as a leader. In the silence of the nearly empty hospital, Marianne made a promise to herself: she would earn the respect of her team, one surgery at a time, one patient at a time. And though she knew it wouldn't be easy, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 2: Unseen Forces. Marianne's first few weeks at St. Matthew's Medical Center were a whirlwind of long hours, challenging cases, and the steep learning curve that came with leading a team. She threw herself into her work with her usual passion, handling everything from high-stakes surgeries to routine administrative meetings with calm determination. But as she settled into her new role, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was working against her. On the surface, things seemed normal. She received polite nods from colleagues in the hallways, respectful greetings from her team in the OR, and occasional praise from patients and staff who admired her skill and dedication. But the atmosphere in the department was subtly charged, and Marianne sensed an undercurrent of resentment, a tension that lingered whenever she entered the room. This unease became especially clear during a department meeting. The meeting room was filled with senior surgeons, junior doctors, and medical interns who had come to discuss upcoming projects and shifts. As Marianne outlined her vision for the department, improvements in surgical techniques, a greater emphasis on collaboration, and the introduction of new minimally invasive procedures, she noticed a few skeptical glances exchanged between her colleagues. When she finished, she opened the floor for questions and feedback, hoping to encourage an open dialogue. She knew that change could be uncomfortable, and she wanted her team to feel involved. Dr. Harrison, a seasoned cardiac surgeon with nearly 2 decades at St. Matthew's, spoke first, his tone measured but cold. "Dr. Evans, these are ambitious ideas," he began, emphasizing the word with an edge that didn't go unnoticed. "We've been handling surgeries here a certain way for years, and our outcomes have been consistently excellent. Are these new protocols really necessary?" Marianne met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I respect the foundation that's been built here, Dr. Harrison. But medical science is constantly evolving, and I believe that staying at the forefront of innovation will only strengthen our department's reputation." These techniques have been proven effective in reducing patient recovery time and complications. My goal isn't to replace what works, but to improve on it. Dr. Harrison nodded, his expression neutral, but Marianne could sense his disapproval. He wasn't the only one. Dr. Patel, another senior surgeon, leaned forward, her expression unreadable. I understand where you're coming from, Dr. Evans, but perhaps some of us are concerned about the learning curve. Not all of our surgeons are comfortable with these new methods. We need time to adapt. Marianne offered a calm smile. I completely understand, Dr. Patel. That's why I plan to implement a phase training program, so everyone can get comfortable with the techniques before we use them in high-risk surgeries. I want our team to feel confident and prepared. The tension in the room was palpable, and Marianne could feel the quiet resistance from several other senior doctors. They were polite, but beneath their words was a clear message: they weren't ready to accept her authority. She left the meeting feeling deflated, wondering if these subtle criticisms were only the beginning. In the following days, small but troubling incidents began to occur. One morning, Marianne found that her office computer had been logged into overnight, even though she hadn't accessed it. Important files were open on the screen, documents she had prepared for an upcoming meeting with the hospital board. She felt a chill as she realized that someone had been going through her work. The next day, during a surgery, she requested a specific instrument only to find that it wasn't in the standard tray. It was a minor inconvenience, but it disrupted the rhythm of the operation. The scrub nurse, who was usually meticulous, apologized profusely, claiming that the tray had been prepared according to the checklist. Marianne brushed it off at first, assuming it was an honest mistake, but a nagging feeling told her it wasn't a coincidence. The incidents continued to pile up. She would find pages missing from patient files, equipment mislabeled or misplaced, and confidential notes seemingly altered or shuffled around. None of these incidents were severe enough to be deemed sabotage outright, but each one eroded her confidence and made her day-to-day work increasingly difficult. It felt like death by 1,000 cuts, a series of small annoyances that gradually chipped away at her authority and sense of security. Marianne confided in James Carter, the young internist who had become her ally. Over lunch, she shared her concerns, her voice lowered so as not to be overheard. James, I can't shake the feeling that someone is trying to undermine me, she said, frustration evident in her tone. I've worked too hard to be here, and now it feels like I'm constantly having to prove myself all over again, even in the simplest things. James nodded, his face serious. I've noticed it too, Dr. Evans. I've seen how people act around you. They respect your skill, but there's this resistance. Some of them resent that you're here, and I think a few might even be trying to push you out. Marianne clenched her fists, feeling a surge of anger. She had known that stepping into a leadership position wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't anticipated this level of quiet hostility. I don't understand it, James. I haven't done anything to threaten anyone. I just want to do my job and help this department grow. I know, James said, his voice soft but determined. But you're a young, black woman in a position of authority. That's enough for some people to feel threatened. Marianne took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed. She had faced prejudice before, but this was different. This was subtle, insidious, and harder to fight. There were no overt comments, no clear instances of discrimination that she could point to or address. Instead, she was dealing with a series of invisible barriers that seemed to appear whenever she tried to make progress. Later that week, Marianne faced another unsettling incident. She was scheduled to perform a complex spinal surgery, one that required absolute precision and focus. As she scrubbed in, she noticed Dr. Harrison standing nearby, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her uneasy. Good luck, Dr. Evans, he said, his tone almost mocking. Thank you, Dr. Harrison, she replied, keeping her voice steady. This patient is in good hands. As she began the surgery, she quickly realized that several of the instruments had been rearranged, their usual placements altered. She adapted on the spot, instructing the scrub nurse to adjust as they went along, but the disruption was enough to heighten her stress. She completed the surgery successfully, but by the end, her nerves were frayed. Afterward, she reviewed the operating room checklist with the nurse, only to find that everything had been marked as standard. The nurse, visibly uncomfortable, avoided her gaze and mumbled, "I don't know what happened, Dr. Evans. Everything was supposed to be in order." Marianne left the OR feeling both relieved and frustrated. She could sense that someone was trying to test her patience, to make her doubt herself. But rather than weakening her resolve, it only fueled her determination to prove them wrong. That evening, as Marianne sat alone in her office, she reflected on everything that had happened. The mistakes, the misplaced instruments, the glances exchanged between her colleagues, it all felt orchestrated, as though someone was quietly trying to undermine her authority without leaving any tangible evidence. She realized that she was facing not just a challenge of leadership, but a test of endurance and resilience. Looking around her office, at the nameplate on her desk and the framed medical licenses on her wall, Marianne made a silent vow to herself: she would not be intimidated, and she would not back down. She had worked too hard to let others define her worth, and she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She would continue to give her best, not just for herself, but for every patient who depended on her and every young doctor watching her journey. Chapter 3: The First Challenge. A few weeks into her role, Marianne was assigned her first major case as head of surgery, a complex, high-risk heart surgery on a young girl named Emily who had a rare congenital defect. Emily's case had been considered too complicated for most surgeons, and her family had waited months for a specialist who could confidently perform the operation. This surgery wasn't just a test of Marianne's skills, it was an opportunity to prove her worth as a leader. As soon as she received the case, Marianne threw herself into the details. She reviewed Emily's medical records, consulted with pediatric cardiologists, and meticulously planned every step of the surgery. Knowing that this operation could change Emily's life and would showcase the department's capabilities, Marianne left nothing to chance. She scheduled meetings with the surgical team, briefed them on the delicate nature of the procedure, and coordinated with anesthesiologists to ensure every aspect was prepared. But as the surgery date approached, Marianne began to feel an undercurrent of resistance. Dr. Harrison, a senior cardiologist who had been part of the team when Emily was first admitted, approached her with thinly veiled skepticism. "Dr. Evans, I see you've scheduled Emily's surgery for this Friday," he said, his voice cool. "It's a delicate case, and I know you're new here. Perhaps it would be wise to consult an outside expert before proceeding." Marianne bristled but maintained her composure. She had anticipated doubts, especially from Dr. Harrison, who hadn't exactly welcomed her with open arms. "Thank you for your concern, Dr. Harrison. I have consulted several specialists, and I'm confident in my plan. Emily's condition has worsened over the last month, and we need to move forward before her health declines further." Dr. Harrison raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Of course, if you think it's best. Just remember, this hospital has a reputation to maintain. We wouldn't want any complications." His words lingered in her mind, carrying a thinly veiled implication that failure would be her burden to bear alone. Undeterred, Marianne spent the rest of the day working with her team, ensuring they were fully prepared. She didn't allow herself to dwell on Dr. Harrison's comments. She knew this surgery would be successful, and she was determined to prove it. The night before the surgery, Marianne returned to her office to review Emily's case one last time. As she went through her notes, she received an email alert. When she opened it, she saw a message from the Chief of Staff: "Dr. Evans, please see me in my office at your earliest convenience." Her heart sank. It was already late, and she had planned on leaving soon to get a full night's rest before the big day. But the tone of the message suggested it wasn't something that could wait. She made her way to the Chief of Staff's office, where Dr. Andrews, a tall, silver-haired man with a no-nonsense demeanor, was waiting for her. "Dr. Evans, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to discuss the surgery scheduled for tomorrow. I understand it's a high-risk procedure, and there have been concerns raised by some of your colleagues." Marianne took a steadying breath. "Yes, Dr. Andrews. I'm aware of the risks, but I've taken every precaution. Emily needs this surgery, and I'm confident it's the best option for her." Dr. Andrews nodded, though his expression remained serious. "I appreciate your confidence, Dr. Evans. But I've had several senior staff members approach me, suggesting that an external consultant might be beneficial. They're concerned that moving forward with this surgery under our current team could jeopardize both the patient and the department's standing." Marianne felt a flash of anger, but she kept her voice calm. "Dr. Andrews, I have already consulted experts in pediatric cardiology. I believe this team is more than capable of performing this operation successfully." Dr. Andrews considered her words before replying. "I trust your judgment, Dr. Evans. I just wanted to bring these concerns to your attention. Ultimately, the decision is yours, but know that you will bear the responsibility, whatever the outcome." Marianne left his office with a mix of frustration and determination. She knew that her colleagues' doubts had little to do with her surgical skills and everything to do with their reluctance to accept her authority. But she wasn't about to back down. This was her case, her patient, and she had a duty to provide Emily with the best care possible. On the morning of the surgery, Marianne arrived at the hospital before dawn, ready to begin the procedure with her team. As she scrubbed in, she noticed Dr. Harrison standing nearby, observing her with a cold, almost smug expression. "Good luck, Dr. Evans," he said, the condescension in his voice unmistakable. "I'll be monitoring the results closely." "Thank you, Dr. Harrison," Marianne replied, refusing to let his comments shake her. She gathered her team in the OR, walking them through the plan one final time before they began. Every detail was in place, and the mood was tense but focused. As the surgery progressed, Marianne felt completely in her element. Every movement was deliberate, every instruction to her team precise and clear. Emily's tiny heart required the utmost care, and Marianne's hands moved with a steady grace, her years of training guiding her through each delicate maneuver. But halfway through the procedure, she realized something was wrong. She had requested a specific type of suturing material for closing the incision, material that minimized the risk of infection in young patients. However, when she asked the scrub nurse for it, she was handed a different, inferior type of suture. "Where's the material I requested?" Marianne asked, her voice calm but firm. The scrub nurse, looking flustered, replied, "I'm so sorry, Dr. Evans. The usual sutures were missing from the supply cabinet this morning. This was all that was available." Marianne clenched her jaw, but she maintained her focus. She couldn't afford to let this setback throw her off. "Fine, we'll make do," she said, quickly adjusting her technique to work with what she had. The rest of the surgery continued without incident, and by the time they finished, Emily's vitals were stable, and the operation was a success. Marianne breathed a sigh of relief as she closed the final incision, knowing that despite the obstacles, she had given her patient the best possible outcome. After the surgery, as she reviewed the case with her team, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was amiss. The missing sutures, the subtle resistance from her colleagues, the concerns raised by Dr. Andrews, it all felt too coincidental. She suspected that someone was trying to make her fail, and she resolved to find out who. That afternoon, she visited the hospital supply manager, a no-nonsense woman named Karen who had worked at St. Matthew's for years. "Karen, I need to ask you about the supplies in OR3 this morning. The suturing material I specifically requested wasn't available. Do you know what happened?" Karen frowned, checking her records. "That's strange, Dr. Evans. I checked the supply myself last night, and everything was in order. I'll look into it for you." Marianne thanked her and returned to her office, her mind racing. She couldn't prove anything yet, but she knew she had to stay vigilant. This wasn't just about one surgery, it was about her reputation, her authority, and the message she was sending to her colleagues. She couldn't afford to let them undermine her, not when so many people were counting on her. Later that evening, Marianne visited Emily and her family. Emily's mother hugged Marianne, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Dr. Evans. You saved our daughter. We can never repay you." Marianne felt a surge of pride. "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Collins. Emily is a strong girl, and she has a bright future ahead of her." Leaving the hospital that night, Marianne felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced her first real challenge as head of surgery, and despite the obstacles, she had succeeded. But she knew that this was only the beginning. There were unseen forces working against her, and she would need every ounce of her skill and determination to overcome them. As she walked out into the cool night air, she silently promised herself that she would not let anyone, or anything, prevent her from doing her job. She was here to stay, and she would prove herself one surgery at a time, no matter who stood in her way. Chapter 4: An Unexpected Ally. After the successful surgery on Emily, Marianne returned to her work with a renewed sense of confidence. Yet, despite her achievement, the small acts of sabotage and silent resistance around her continued. Missing supplies, misplaced records, and subtle but pointed remarks from her colleagues became almost routine. But rather than intimidating her, these obstacles only deepened her resolve to prove herself. She would have persevered in silence if it weren't for an unexpected ally, Dr. James Carter. Dr. James Carter was a junior internist at St. Matthew's, known for his humility, sharp mind, and passion for patient care. Young and dedicated, James had joined the hospital only a few months before Marianne, and, like her, he was determined to make a difference. Though their paths hadn't crossed much before, he had heard about her work and admired her skill and composure, especially given the challenges she faced from senior colleagues. One evening, as Marianne was finishing up paperwork in her office, James knocked lightly on her door. She looked up, surprised but grateful for the break. "Dr. Carter, what brings you here this late?" she asked, gesturing for him to take a seat. James closed the door behind him and sat across from her, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. "Dr. Evans, I know this might sound forward, but I wanted to talk to you about something I've noticed, regarding how you've been treated since you arrived." Marianne raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on, Dr. Carter." James took a deep breath, his eyes steady. "I know I'm just an internist, and I haven't been here long, but I've seen how the senior staff has been acting around you. The missing equipment, the changes in the surgery schedule, it all seems deliberate, like they're testing you or, worse, trying to make you fail." Marianne's shoulders relaxed a bit, and she let out a sigh she hadn't realized she was holding. She had suspected this all along, but hearing someone else acknowledge it was both validating and unsettling. "You're right, Dr. Carter," she replied softly, leaning back in her chair. "I've felt it too. I've tried to keep my focus on the work, but it's been challenging." James's expression softened, and he nodded. "It's not right, Dr. Evans. You've proven yourself as a surgeon, and they should be supporting you, not undermining you. I'm here to help however I can. I know I'm new here, but I want you to know you're not alone." Marianne felt a surge of gratitude. She had been handling the situation on her own for so long that she'd almost forgotten what it was like to have someone genuinely in her corner. "Thank you, James. Your support means more than you know. This environment has been difficult to navigate, and I can use all the help I can get." From that evening on, James became her trusted ally. While she handled the bigger responsibilities of the surgery department, he quietly kept an eye on the subtle ways in which others were working against her. Together, they began to notice patterns, certain doctors who would accidentally misplace her files or change procedure details without informing her. James would discreetly report these incidents to Mary Ann, and they worked to protect her from the sabotage. One particular incident marked a turning point in their alliance. Mary Ann had been scheduled to perform an intricate orthopedic surgery on a trauma patient, but when she arrived in the operating room, she found that key equipment, instruments she had specifically requested for the procedure, were missing. Fuming but determined not to let it affect her performance, Mary Ann had the team improvise with what was available. As soon as the surgery ended, she called James, who immediately came to her office to discuss what had happened. "This isn't a coincidence, James. The equipment was clearly moved or replaced before the surgery," Mary Ann said, her frustration evident. James nodded, looking thoughtful. "I've been keeping track of the supply chain for the OR, and I think I know who might be responsible." He paused, then continued in a lowered voice. "Dr. Harrison and a couple of the senior nurses, they're often the last ones in the OR after procedures, and I've seen them lingering around equipment when no one else is present. They always seem to be around when things go missing." Mary Ann's heart sank but was tempered with resolve. She had suspected Dr. Harrison, but hearing James confirm her suspicions made it undeniable. "Thank you, James. I'll have to address this eventually, but for now, I need to keep things discreet. I don't want to escalate things unless I have solid proof." James nodded, clearly relieved that she trusted him. "I'll keep an eye out and let you know if I see anything unusual. In the meantime, maybe we could start logging the equipment ourselves, keeping track of what's being checked out and by whom." Mary Ann smiled, her admiration for James growing. "That's a good idea, James. Let's start a system, quietly. If they're trying to push me out, we'll make it a lot harder for them." Over the next few weeks, James and Mary Ann implemented a covert system to monitor supplies and document the equipment usage. James quietly spread the word among other young, trustworthy staff members to remain vigilant and report any unusual activity around Mary Ann's cases. Slowly, they began to piece together a picture of who was behind the disruptions. Several nurses, who were close allies of Dr. Harrison, had been manipulating schedules and moving supplies. They were careful to do it subtly, leaving no evidence and creating enough plausible deniability to avoid suspicion. But with each incident that James documented, they built a stronger case. One day, as Mary Ann was finishing a surgery, James slipped a note into her hand. It read, "Meet me in the on-call room after your rounds. I think we've got something." Curious and slightly apprehensive, Mary Ann made her way to the on-call room, where James was waiting. He held up a printed schedule, his face alight with excitement. "Dr. Evans, take a look at this," he said, pointing to a series of dates and times. "These are all the instances where equipment or schedules have been altered, and each time, either Dr. Harrison or his allies were the last to access them. I managed to get access logs from the supply room. They don't know we have this." Mary Ann's eyes widened as she reviewed the list. It was undeniable. Here was proof that Dr. Harrison and his allies had been actively working against her, using their access to hinder her surgeries and shake her confidence. "This is it, James," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and determination. "With this information, I can bring this to the chief medical officer. It's time to make them accountable." James nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm with you all the way, Dr. Evans. Whatever you need." The next day, Mary Ann scheduled a meeting with Dr. Linda Barnes, the chief medical officer. She shared the evidence she and James had gathered, explaining how it had impacted her ability to lead effectively. Dr. Barnes listened carefully, her face a mixture of anger and disappointment as she reviewed the access logs and reports. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Dr. Evans," Dr. Barnes said finally, her tone serious. "I'm appalled that this is happening in our department. Rest assured, I'll be looking into this personally. St. Matthew's will not tolerate this kind of behavior." Marianne left the meeting feeling a mix of vindication and relief. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but she felt more confident than ever with James by her side. That evening, Marianne and James celebrated with coffee in the hospital cafeteria. As they talked, Marianne looked at him with genuine gratitude. "James, I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you for believing in me, even when things were tough." James smiled, a touch of humility in his gaze. "Dr. Evans, you're the kind of leader this place needs. I'm just glad I could help." Together, they looked around the hospital, knowing that while there were still hurdles ahead, they now had the strength to face them, as a team. Marianne had gained an unexpected ally, but more importantly, she had found a friend who was as committed to making a difference as she was. Chapter 5: The Breaking Point. Marianne's resolve was unwavering. Despite the mounting opposition from senior colleagues and the subtle sabotage she faced daily, she refused to give in. She knew she had the skills and the drive to lead this department, and she would prove it. However, even with James's support, the resistance against her grew stronger, culminating in a high-profile case that would push her to the breaking point. This time, Marianne was assigned an incredibly complex and delicate surgery for a high-profile patient, a state senator's wife who suffered from a rare and life-threatening aneurysm. The senator was a major benefactor of St. Matthew's, and the success of the surgery was crucial not only for Marianne but for the hospital as well. Failure wasn't an option, and her opponents knew it. In the days leading up to the surgery, Marianne was meticulous in her planning. She consulted specialists, reviewed every possible complication, and worked with her team to ensure each step was flawless. This case had the potential to showcase her skill, solidify her authority, and finally silence the doubts of her detractors. But as the surgery date approached, a series of events unfolded that felt far too coincidental to be mere accidents. The first incident happened 2 days before the surgery. Marianne had just finished a meeting with her team when she noticed an unsettling email waiting in her inbox. It was from Dr. Harrison, the senior surgeon who had been her most vocal critic since her arrival. The email was short, but its tone was unmistakably undermining. "Dr. Evans, I've reviewed your plan for the upcoming surgery. Given the complexity of the case, I strongly suggest that you reconsider your approach. This is not a procedure for someone of limited experience." Marianne's fists clenched as she read the email. It was yet another veiled attempt to undermine her authority, wrapped in concern but laced with condescension. She refused to let it rattle her, though. She typed a polite but firm response. "Thank you for your input, Dr. Harrison. I have consulted with multiple specialists and feel confident in the approach we have selected. I appreciate your concern, but I believe this plan is in the best interest of the patient." But as she closed her laptop, a sense of unease settled over her. This case was more than just a surgery. It was a proving ground, and Dr. Harrison and others would do anything to see her fail. The day before the surgery, Marianne double-checked the supplies and equipment she had meticulously arranged for the procedure. Everything seemed in order until she returned to her office to find a message from the hospital's procurement team. Several critical instruments she had requested were unavailable, and the only replacements were older, less precise models. Marianne immediately called James, who arrived in her office within minutes, looking concerned. "This is getting ridiculous," she told him, frustration clear in her voice. "I checked everything this morning, and now, suddenly, key instruments are unavailable. It's too convenient." James frowned, his face grim. "I'll look into it. There's no way this is a coincidence. Someone wants you to go into that surgery unprepared." Later that night, James returned with information he'd gathered discreetly. "It looks like the requests were modified by someone in supply management, someone connected to Dr. Harrison. I couldn't find direct proof, but the timing is suspicious." Marianne's heart sank. She was exhausted, her mind filled with the weight of expectations and the increasing resistance from her own department. But there was no turning back. This surgery wasn't just about the patient now, it was a statement. She would not let them break her. On the morning of the surgery, Marianne arrived at the hospital before sunrise, her thoughts focused and her determination unbreakable. She went over the procedure in her mind repeatedly, compensating for the missing instruments, mentally adjusting her technique. She knew she would need every bit of her skill to make up for the sabotage. As she scrubbed in, the atmosphere in the OR was tense. Nurses and surgical techs moved quietly, sensing the pressure. Dr. Harrison entered the OR just before the surgery began, positioning himself near the observation area. He gave Marianne a tight-lipped smile, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Good luck, Dr. Evans," he said smoothly, his voice barely concealing a patronizing tone. "Let's hope everything goes smoothly." Marianne ignored him, steeling herself for the operation. She looked at her team, giving each member a confident nod. "Let's begin," she said, her voice firm and steady. The surgery was one of the most challenging she had ever performed. With the older instruments, she had to be even more precise, her movements more careful and measured. Every cut, every stitch required absolute focus, her hands steady even as her mind raced with calculations. She could feel the eyes of her team on her, and she was acutely aware of Dr. Harrison's gaze from the observation deck, watching her every move. Midway through the procedure, complications arose. The older instruments were harder to manipulate, causing a minor tear in the arterial wall. The patient's heart rate spiked, alarms blaring as blood pressure dropped. Marianne acted instantly, directing the team with precise commands, adjusting her approach in real time. Her calm under pressure steadied the team, who followed her lead without hesitation. As she worked to stabilize the patient, she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. One misstep, and the patient's life, and her reputation, would be on the line. But her hands never wavered. She visualized each step in her mind, refusing to let fear seep in, focusing solely on the patient's needs. After what felt like hours, the patient's vitals began to stabilize. The tear was repaired, and Marianne completed the rest of the procedure without incident. When she closed the final suture, the room fell silent, the tension dissipating as relief washed over the team. Marianne stepped back, her scrubs drenched with sweat but her heart swelling with pride. She had faced every obstacle, every attempt to sabotage her, and emerged victorious. Her patient was stable, and the surgery had been a success. She glanced up at Dr. Harrison, who was watching from the observation deck, his face a mask of surprise and grudging respect. After the surgery, as she changed out of her scrubs, Marianne felt the weight of the morning's events settle on her shoulders. She had done it, but the strain of fighting not just for her patients but against her own colleagues was becoming unbearable. She wanted to celebrate her victory, but instead, she felt a pang of bitterness. This was supposed to be about saving lives, not politics and power plays. As she returned to her office, James was waiting for her, a warm smile on his face. "Dr. Evans, you were incredible. I heard from the nurses, they said you handled everything flawlessly, even with the complications." Marianne gave him a tired smile, gratitude softening her expression. "Thank you, James. I couldn't have done it without your support. But I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting like this. It's exhausting." James's expression turned serious, and he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll keep standing by you, and there are others here who respect you, who want to see you succeed. You're changing this place, even if it doesn't seem like it." Marianne took a deep breath, his words resonating with her. She realized that this wasn't just her battle. By standing her ground, she was paving the way for others, fighting for a culture that valued talent over prejudice. She couldn't give up now, not when so much was at stake. That evening, the hospital director called her personally to congratulate her on the surgery's success. Dr. Evans, the senator's family has expressed their deepest gratitude. They're very pleased with the outcome, and I wanted to let you know that your work hasn't gone unnoticed. Marianne thanked him, feeling a mixture of pride and exhaustion. She knew that while this victory was significant, the battle was far from over. She had proven herself, but the resistance in her department was rooted deeply, and she would need every bit of strength, resilience, and support to continue her journey. As she left the hospital that night, she felt a sense of resolve stronger than ever before. She had reached her breaking point, but she hadn't broken. Instead, she had emerged even more determined to lead her department, to stand up for her patients and her principles, and to make a lasting impact on St. Matthew's Medical Center. She wasn't just a surgeon, she was a force of change, and she was ready to keep fighting. Chapter 6: A Bold Decision. The successful surgery on the senator's wife had brought Marianne a momentary sense of victory. She had overcome deliberate sabotage, navigated a high-pressure operation, and emerged with her patient stable and the gratitude of a powerful family. But as the initial wave of relief faded, she was reminded that the challenges within the walls of St. Matthew's Medical Center were far from over. The quiet hostility from certain senior colleagues, especially Dr. Harrison, only grew more intense. She knew it was time to make a bold decision if she wanted to bring about real change. That week, Dr. Linda Barnes, the chief medical officer and one of Marianne's few supporters among the administration, called her into her office. "Marianne," Dr. Barnes began, gesturing for her to sit down. "The senator's family has spoken highly of you. The board has been buzzing about your skill, but I also know that you've been facing resistance from within the department." Marianne nodded, grateful that Dr. Barnes acknowledged the struggle. "It's been challenging, Dr. Barnes. I know some of my colleagues don't want me here, and it's gotten to a point where I feel like I'm constantly working against my own team." Dr. Barnes leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "You've done everything right, but it seems clear to me that the culture here has become a barrier to progress. Have you thought about how you might address it directly? This could be your chance to take control of the situation." Marianne hesitated, understanding the gravity of Dr. Barnes' words. Confronting the department and pushing for change was risky. But without a decisive shift, the passive-aggressive resistance would continue, eroding the morale of the team and undermining patient care. She knew that this was her moment to take a stand, to make a decision that would either solidify her authority or push her opponents further into opposition. After a few moments of silence, she nodded, determination settling in her chest. "You're right, Dr. Barnes. It's time to address this head-on. I need to call a meeting with the department and make it clear that this resistance, this passive sabotage, is unacceptable. I can't lead if my own team refuses to work with me." Dr. Barnes nodded approvingly. "If anyone can handle this, it's you, Marianne. I support you fully, and I believe that confronting this issue openly may help to expose those who are undermining you." That evening, after hours, Marianne sat in her office, drafting an email that would shake up the department. She knew that a direct confrontation was risky, but she was exhausted from working in an environment filled with whispers and hidden agendas. She needed to bring the tension to the surface, to force the team to acknowledge the resentment simmering beneath the surface. Only then could they move forward as a unified department. The email was short and to the point. "Dear team, I'm calling a mandatory department meeting tomorrow at 7 a.m. to discuss the current issues within our team. It's essential that we have an open and honest conversation about our goals and expectations as we work together to provide the best care for our patients. Sincerely, Dr. Marianne Evans, Head of Surgery." She sent the email with a mix of anxiety and resolve, knowing that tomorrow would be a pivotal day. She was prepared to address the tension directly and, if necessary, expose those who were undermining her leadership. The next morning, as her team assembled in the conference room, Marianne could feel the tension in the air. Senior surgeons, junior doctors, nurses, and support staff all filed in, each with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Dr. Harrison sat near the back, arms crossed, his expression stony. She also noticed James in the corner, his supportive smile a small but comforting presence. Marianne took a deep breath, walking to the front of the room. The murmurs died down, and all eyes turned toward her. She began speaking with a calm but resolute tone, choosing her words carefully. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "As many of you know, the past few months have been challenging. We've handled high-profile cases, complex surgeries, and demanding schedules. But there's been an undercurrent of resistance that I can no longer ignore." A few of the surgeons exchanged glances, and Marianne continued, her voice firm. "We are here to serve our patients, to provide the best care possible. But I've noticed that certain members of this team have allowed personal grievances and biases to interfere with our work. This is unacceptable. We cannot move forward if we aren't working together." The room fell silent, her words sinking in. Dr. Harrison's face was a mask of barely concealed irritation, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marianne could sense the weight of her words hanging over them, the air thick with tension. "I want to be clear," she continued, her gaze never wavering. "I was appointed head of surgery to lead this team. I respect each of you and your expertise, but I also expect the same respect in return. I will not tolerate any further acts of sabotage or disrespect. We are professionals, and we owe it to our patients and to each other to act like it." The silence stretched, and then Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, his face a mask of forced politeness. "Dr. Evans, I think some of us have concerns about certain decisions being made without proper input from the senior team. Perhaps that's where some of this tension is coming from." Marianne met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Thank you for your input, Dr. Harrison. I'm always open to constructive feedback. But feedback should be communicated professionally, not through behind-the-scenes actions that disrupt our work. If anyone has an issue with my leadership, I invite you to speak openly and directly." Dr. Harrison looked away, his expression sour, but he remained silent. Marianne continued, glancing at each member of the team, hoping to convey both authority and a willingness to work together. "I want this department to thrive, to lead in innovative surgical care. But that can only happen if we have a united front. From this point forward, I expect everyone to act with the integrity and professionalism that brought you to this field." She paused, letting her words settle. The room remained tense, but she could sense a shift. Some members of the team looked thoughtful, others uncertain, but the hostility seemed to have softened, replaced by a grudging respect for her direct approach. After the meeting, James caught up with Marianne as she left the conference room. His face was lit with admiration. "Dr. Evans, that was incredible. You held your ground, and I think they heard you." Marianne exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering tension filling her chest. "I hope so, James. This department can't move forward with these divisions. It was risky, but I had to make it clear that I'm here to stay." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Marianne noticed some of her team members glancing at her with newfound respect. Even those who had been skeptical seemed to have softened, perhaps realizing that she was committed to leading them with strength and fairness. Dr. Harrison, however, was nowhere to be seen, a clear indication that her words had struck a nerve. That afternoon, Dr. Barnes visited her office with a warm smile. "Marianne, I heard about the meeting. I have to say, I'm impressed. That was a bold decision, and I believe it was exactly what this team needed." Marianne felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Dr. Barnes. I needed them to see that I'm not here to be pushed aside. I'm here to lead, and I won't tolerate anything less than full cooperation." Dr. Barnes nodded. "And you've earned that right. You've shown them what real leadership looks like. I think you'll find that, after today, things may start to shift in your favor." With Dr. Barnes's support and the respect of a slowly unifying team, Marianne felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that this bold decision had been a necessary turning point. She had demanded respect, called out the unprofessionalism that had plagued the department, and had made it clear that she would not be intimidated. As she left the hospital that evening, she felt a profound sense of relief and empowerment. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had taken control of her situation, cementing her place as a true leader. The department might never be free of all resistance, but she had drawn a line, and those who opposed her would think twice before crossing it. Marianne had taken a risk, and it had paid off. She had earned her place, not just through skill, but through courage, and she was ready to lead St. Matthew's Medical Center into a new chapter, one that promised unity, respect, and a renewed commitment to the mission they all shared. Chapter 7: The Turning Point. Following the tense department meeting, a shift began to take root in the surgery department at St. Matthew's. Marianne's decisive stand against the hostility and unspoken resistance had left a lasting impression on the team. She noticed subtle but unmistakable changes in how her colleagues behaved. Some had softened, offering nods of acknowledgement in the hallways, while others remained distant but were more careful, aware that their actions were now under scrutiny. For the first time since she'd started, Marianne felt like she might be gaining genuine traction, earning not just the begrudging respect of her colleagues but something more valuable, a sense of authority that could unite the department. Yet, she knew that true change would only come with action, not words. She had made her expectations clear, now it was time to deliver on them. Shortly after the department meeting, a major case came up that would test both her leadership and her team's willingness to work together. The case involved a young mother named Rachel, who had been in a severe car accident, leaving her with complex injuries requiring a highly coordinated multidisciplinary approach. Rachel's condition was critical, and her surgery would require the expertise of multiple surgeons from different specialties, all working in unison, the type of case that would typically spark tension and disagreement in a department with fractured communication. Marianne was determined to approach this case as an opportunity to demonstrate the strength of a unified team. She immediately began organizing a strategy meeting, inviting surgeons from orthopedics, neurology, and cardiology, as well as the intensive care unit staff, to participate in a collaborative plan. She made it clear that every voice was valued, and she encouraged open dialogue, knowing this would be key to the operation's success. Dr. Harrison, still simmering from their earlier confrontation, attended the meeting, but this time he remained noticeably quiet, observing rather than interrupting. Perhaps her words had finally struck a chord, or perhaps he realized the stakes of this case were too high to allow personal grievances to interfere. Either way, Marianne was relieved. The last thing she needed was more opposition in the midst of a case this critical. "We're dealing with multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a head injury that will require careful monitoring," Marianne began, addressing the team in the conference room. "Our primary objective is to stabilize Rachel's vital organs and prevent any further complications. I want us all on the same page. This case is about collaboration, and every one of you brings a critical skill set to the table." Dr. Patel, an orthopedic surgeon with years of experience, was the first to speak up. "Dr. Evans, I agree. If we can stabilize her pelvis first, it will make the abdominal surgery less risky. But timing will be everything here, we can't afford any delays once we start." Marianne nodded, grateful for his professionalism and insight. "Exactly, Dr. Patel. If we coordinate effectively, I believe we can make this work. Each of you will be responsible for specific stages of the surgery, but communication is key. I'll be overseeing the entire procedure to ensure we're aligned." The discussion continued, with each surgeon contributing ideas, mapping out possible complications, and working together in a way that felt refreshingly cohesive. Dr. Harrison, though initially hesitant, gradually began offering his input, providing valuable suggestions that improved the overall strategy. Marianne couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. This was the team she had dreamed of leading, a group of talented individuals united in purpose, not divided by ego or bias. As the meeting concluded, Marianne addressed the room. "Thank you all for your insights and commitment. This is exactly what I want to see more of in our department. Together, we're capable of achieving remarkable things." She could see a shift in the team's expressions, a shared sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. For the first time, Marianne felt that they were beginning to rally around her vision. The day of the surgery arrived, and the atmosphere in the hospital was charged with anticipation. The entire team gathered early, reviewing the plan in detail one last time. Marianne felt a mixture of pride and determination as she watched her colleagues prepare, each focused and ready. The case was delicate and would test their stamina and precision, but the team was unified, and she knew that would make all the difference. As the surgery began, Marianne moved seamlessly between roles, overseeing the operation, coordinating the stages of each procedure, and stepping in to assist when necessary. The OR was a ballet of skilled hands, each surgeon stepping up exactly when needed, each nurse and tech ready with the tools and support required for each phase. For hours, the team worked tirelessly, with Marianne at the helm, ensuring that each transition was smooth and that every surgeon felt supported. Midway through the procedure, a complication arose. Rachel's blood pressure began to plummet due to internal bleeding that hadn't shown up in the pre-surgery scans. Dr. Harrison, who was handling a vascular repair at the time, looked up at Marianne, his expression tense. "Dr. Evans, we'll need to adjust immediately if we're going to keep her stable. Do we have a backup plan?" Without missing a beat, Marianne directed the team. "Dr. Patel, prepare for an emergency transfusion. Dr. Harrison, continue with the vascular repair, and I'll assist with the abdominal wound." The team sprang into action, moving in perfect coordination as they adjusted to the complication. Marianne's calm, decisive instructions helped keep the atmosphere focused, and she noticed Dr. Harrison casting her a look of reluctant respect. For once, they were working as a true team, setting aside any personal biases and focusing solely on the life before them. After 8 grueling hours, the surgery was complete. The team stepped back, exhausted but exhilarated. Rachel's vitals were stable, and the procedure had gone as smoothly as they could have hoped, given the circumstances. Marianne allowed herself a brief moment of relief as she glanced around the room, catching the weary smiles and nods of appreciation from her colleagues. The following day, as Marianne made her rounds, she stopped by Rachel's room to speak with her family. The young woman was still in critical condition but was expected to make a full recovery. Rachel's husband and parents greeted Marianne with tearful gratitude, thanking her for her dedication and the efforts of her team. "Thank you, Dr. Evans," Rachel's mother whispered, gripping Marianne's hand. "You've given our family hope." Marianne felt a wave of emotion as she left the room. This was why she had chosen to become a surgeon, why she had fought so hard to lead a team, to make a real difference in the lives of people who depended on her. As she returned to her office, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from Dr. Patel, written in his precise handwriting. "Dr. Evans, thank you for leading us through a challenging case with clarity and strength. Your dedication inspires us all." She read the note with a sense of accomplishment, knowing that her hard work was finally bearing fruit. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. Dr. Patel's words symbolized the turning point she had hoped for, a recognition of her leadership and her vision for the department. The next few weeks saw a noticeable change in the department's atmosphere. Colleagues who had once been indifferent or even hostile now approached her with ideas, feedback, and requests for collaboration. Dr. Harrison, though still reserved, no longer displayed the same open hostility. He even sought her input on one of his cases, a gesture that showed he was beginning to accept her leadership. One afternoon, as Marianne passed through the corridor, she noticed James standing by the nurse's station. He gave her a knowing smile, nodding in approval. "Dr. Evans, I think you've done it," he said, admiration in his voice. "They're finally seeing you for who you really are, a leader and a force for change. Marianne smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, James. I couldn't have done it without your support." He shook his head. "This is all you, Dr. Evans. You showed them what true leadership looks like, and they've finally realized you're exactly what this department needed." As she continued down the hallway, Marianne felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had endured sabotage, prejudice, and open hostility, but through resilience and integrity, she had proven herself. She had turned the tides, bringing the team together in a way that elevated not only her but the entire department. For the first time, Marianne felt like she truly belonged at St. Matthew's, not because of her title or her accomplishments, but because she had earned the respect and trust of those around her. She was no longer just the head of surgery, she was their leader, a catalyst for unity and excellence. Marianne knew the challenges weren't over, but as she looked forward, she felt ready for whatever came next. The department had reached a turning point, and together, they would build something lasting, something meaningful. And with her team now rallying behind her, she knew the best was yet to come. Chapter 8: A New Beginning. The atmosphere at St. Matthew's Medical Center had transformed in the months since Marianne's decisive meeting with her department. The initial hostility and suspicion that once filled the air had slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Marianne had finally managed to unite her team and win the trust of her colleagues, creating an environment where collaboration, rather than competition, thrived. But as much as the department's newfound unity was an accomplishment in itself, Marianne wanted to ensure that this change would last. She had no intention of letting the department slip back into its old ways. It was time to build a foundation for growth and integrity, and she knew exactly where to start. One morning, she called a meeting to discuss new initiatives that would not only elevate the standards of the surgery department but also set a precedent for the entire hospital. The room was packed with eager faces, all waiting to see what direction Marianne would take them next. She began by explaining her vision. "We've come a long way, and I'm grateful for the resilience and dedication each of you has shown. But this isn't just about overcoming the past. I want us to focus on building a future that makes St. Matthew's a leader in compassionate, patient-centered care, a place where innovation and ethics go hand in hand." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "I've been considering a mentorship program, where experienced surgeons and specialists would work closely with junior doctors and interns. I want us to create an environment where every voice, no matter how junior, feels valued and empowered to learn. This way, we're not only improving patient care, but also cultivating the next generation of leaders right here at St. Matthew's." Dr. Patel, one of the senior surgeons who had gradually become one of Marianne's strongest supporters, spoke up. "I think that's a fantastic idea, Dr. Evans. When I was a young doctor, I learned the most by observing experienced surgeons. It's time we gave the same opportunity to our interns and junior staff." Others nodded in agreement, and Marianne felt a surge of satisfaction. The idea of mentorship resonated with the department, and it was clear her team was ready to embrace this new approach. James, her steadfast ally, raised his hand. "Dr. Evans, would the mentorship program be open to all departments, or are you thinking of focusing on surgery?" Marianne smiled, grateful for his question. "Ideally, I'd like this program to extend beyond surgery. St. Matthew's has always been a hospital that treats each case with a multidisciplinary approach, and our mentorship should reflect that. I'm hoping to propose this idea to Dr. Barnes, and with her support, we can make it hospital-wide." James nodded, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Count me in, then." Marianne saw the ripple of excitement in the room. Her team was not only open to change but eager to help drive it. She had earned their respect, and now, together, they could shape the future of the department. Over the following weeks, the mentorship program took shape. Senior surgeons paired up with junior doctors and interns, each mentoring relationship carefully chosen to ensure that every trainee received guidance tailored to their strengths and areas for growth. Marianne herself took on a handful of young doctors, spending extra time with each one, teaching them not only the technical skills of surgery but also the ethical considerations that guided her work. One of her ments was Dr. Lila Chen, a talented but reserved resident with a natural aptitude for precision. Lila had struggled with confidence and often held back in discussions, but under Marianne's mentorship, she blossomed. Marianne encouraged her to speak up, to challenge herself, and to trust her instincts. One day, after a particularly challenging surgery, Lila approached Marianne, her face glowing with newfound confidence. "Dr. Evans, I just wanted to say thank you. Working with you has been life-changing. I finally feel like I can handle these cases without second-guessing myself every step of the way." Marianne felt a surge of pride. Moments like these reminded her why she had fought so hard to create a supportive environment. It wasn't just about her career, it was about building a legacy of excellence and integrity that would live on in the next generation. Meanwhile, Marianne continued to work closely with Dr. Barnes and the hospital administration to expand the program. They implemented regular skill-sharing workshops, inviting experts in different fields to lecture and perform demonstrations. Surgeons, nurses, and support staff all had opportunities to learn from each other, fostering a level of collaboration and mutual respect that was becoming a hallmark of St. Matthew's. Dr. Harrison, who had once been her greatest critic, approached her after one of these workshops. "Dr. Evans," he began, his voice softened with a rare tone of humility, "I have to admit, I was wrong about you. This department, it's better because of you. I may not have seen it at first, but it's hard to deny the impact you've had here." Marianne looked at him, a small smile on her face. She could sense that his words were sincere, and the fact that he was willing to acknowledge her leadership spoke volumes. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison," she replied, her tone genuine. "I'm glad we've been able to find a way to work together. I think we can accomplish a lot as a team." Dr. Harrison nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. For the first time, Marianne felt that the barriers between them had dissolved, replaced by a mutual respect that had been hard-won but was now unbreakable. As the mentorship program flourished, so did the reputation of the surgery department. Word of their collaborative and patient-centered approach spread, attracting top medical talent and inspiring other departments to implement similar mentorship initiatives. Marianne was even invited to speak at several conferences, sharing St. Matthew's transformation journey and the impact of their focus on mentorship and teamwork. Her speeches became a source of inspiration, and as she spoke about the journey from resistance to unity, she often caught sight of James and her other colleagues in the audience, nodding with pride. They were living proof that change was possible, even in the most challenging environments. One evening, after a particularly successful conference where she had presented on the importance of mentorship, Marianne returned to St. Matthew's to find James and a few members of the department waiting for her. They had arranged a small celebration in the staff lounge, complete with coffee, pastries, and a card signed by nearly every member of the surgery department. "Dr. Evans," James said, handing her the card with a grin, "we just wanted to say thank you for everything. You've made this place better, and we're grateful to have you as our leader." Marianne opened the card, reading the heartfelt messages from her team. Each note was a testament to the impact she had made: doctors who felt supported, interns who felt encouraged, and colleagues who finally felt united. It was overwhelming, and Marianne blinked back tears as she looked around the room. "Thank you, everyone," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I may be the head of this department, but every one of you has helped make this change happen. We did this together, and I couldn't be prouder of what we've accomplished." In the weeks that followed, the department continued to thrive, and St. Matthew's became known as a hospital where innovation and empathy guided every decision. Patients felt the difference too. They could sense the unity and purpose within the team, and they left the hospital with a renewed sense of hope and care. Marianne often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced countless obstacles, fought against resistance and prejudice, and endured moments of doubt and frustration. But she had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more committed than ever to her calling. As she looked around the bustling hallways of St. Matthew's, seeing her colleagues working together in harmony, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was more than just a department or a hospital, it was a community, a family bound by a shared purpose. In those quiet moments between surgeries, when the day's work was done, Marianne would sometimes think about her journey and smile. She had not only built a department that thrived but had also created a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. For Marianne Evans, this was truly a new beginning, one that promised a future filled with purpose, compassion, and lasting impact. This story is more than just one person's triumph over a challenging system. It's Marianne's journey to prove that perseverance, professionalism, and a deep belief in your work can break through even the toughest prejudices and barriers. She didn't just earn respect, she transformed the entire culture around her. Marianne challenged invisible walls and built not just a team but a true family, united by a shared purpose to make healthcare better for every patient. Her story is inspiring and reminds us that each of us can be a force for change, even when the road seems impossible. If this story touched you as well, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more stories that inspire resilience, kindness, and the power of courage.